Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Yesterday we ended up around, I think, query parameter models. That's what we went through yesterday, which was pretty straightforward, nothing new. Today we're going into bodies, and it's pretty straightforward. I thought like they would do some explanations as to what cookie parameters and header parameters were, but they didn't really go into that the way they did in like some of the earlier pages, like with virtual environments or environment variables, which was kind of a bummer, but that's okay. Um, it's still being like a little aggressively comprehensive, to be honest. But yeah, so let's just continue on. We're gonna do a few of these pages today. I think we'll get through to example data, and then we'll get through the rest today. I myself am at this page here, response model return types, and there's still quite a ways to go in this tutorial guide. It's like crazy. I'm gonna try and aim for, I think, 5 or 6 pages a day. So it's still gonna take me a while. Let's see how big dependencies is and security is itself. Woo, okay. It's gonna be a long document. And honestly, like, this isn't necessarily the best way to do this. If I was you, I would go down the route that I did with the linear algebra stuff where I do fast API as a coding exercise, right? And you can learn major chunks that way and then refine it. For me, the thing is, Fast API is actually more recent in my mind than doing linear algebra and code, because I had to develop one last year or so. But for the project I'm working on right now, I want it to be much more rigorous, and I found that these docs were very thorough. So I wanted to read through the entire doc. Um, Not because I wanted to understand Fast API particularly deeply, but because, and I mean, I do, but more importantly, because I felt like doing this process would also cement a lot of how APIs work in general and like the standards and practices of APIs. Because this documentation does a very good job of that, and that was important because I think that's an important aspect of the project I'm working on, right? So for me, it's like I'm kind of putting off the doing, but this is all because I have a particularly niche idea about how production ready my final project needs to be. I can like easily spend my time doing this easily. Like it doesn't feel like effort, unlike if you're doing it just for funsies, and which is why if you're doing it just for funsies, right? That's where I would try to do it, learn by doing thing, right? It's when you have a very specific thought process and you feel purposefully driven to do it as well, right? Because sometimes you don't feel that way. Like if it's a task for, I don't know, you work for some e-commerce platform or whatever, and it's just some BS task, you'll be like, you'll learn the bare minimum to try and do it, right? So you won't do this even in that situation. So there's like everything I say basically, there's no fixed way of learning, right? Different things can work differently based on how you see the task at hand and what your goals are for learning and all of that. So anyways, getting back to this. So I think it starts off pretty straightforward that you can have path parameters, mixed with query parameters and body parameters. We've already seen the annotated, what you call it, um, type annotation thing, where you basically give the data type and also some metadata, which is done through this function. It helps do a lot of validations and stuff, as we've seen earlier. There's numeric validations and things like that. In terms of the body, we've also seen that we define like request and response bodies as pydantic models where we can set the defaults and the types and everything. And that's important essentially because Fast API will create the open API schema for you as it goes. So it makes your life much easier to do it that way. Um, So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And then once you have your Pydantic models, you can define a particular item as one of those models, and it will automatically pick up that even without using annotated and saying body specifically. If you define something as a Pydantic model and it is not annotated to be something like a query parameter, so it can you can define like a grouping of query parameters, or a grouping of as I found out today, header parameters and cookie parameters as well. But if you don't annotate it as such, it will automatically be read as a body. um, कोई बात नहीं. Uh, so that's how this works. It's pretty straightforward. And it's also saying here that we can give multiple body parameters, right? So if we just give a body parameter like this, like item item, let's ignore user user, right? Let's just say item item, right? You're gonna get a response object like this, or the expected request object will be like this. But if you have multiple body objects like here where it's item item user user, then those will become embedded or nested within those in the request object. And also, if you do want to actually go ahead and um, get a multiple values. What is this? What is importance? What is this? Singular values. The same way there is a query and path to define extra data for query and path parameters. Fast API provides an equivalent body. For example, extending the previous model, you could decide that you want to have another key importance in the same body besides the item and user. So basically, if you annotate a particular parameter as a body type parameter, it'll be put into the body here. So like here, it's importance annotated in body, even though importance is not defined as a query parameter, as a Pydantic model, and therefore wouldn't automatically be picked up as a body or as the payload to be expected. You can annotate it as such, and then it will become a part of the body. You can have I don't know what this is about. I feel like this is just saying the same thing as before. It's by default singular values are interpreted as query parameters. You don't have to explicitly add a query. You can just do da da da. Okay, we've done this before. Embed a single body parameter. So basically, if you just have one single body parameter and you still want it to show up like this rather than the root be like this, then you can just annotate it with the body type embed equals true, and that's how you get this embedded body type. So you can have multiple body parameters to your path operation function, and Fast API will deal with it essentially. And there's some neat tricks in terms of how you want that shape to be controlled, and you have control over that. That's basically everything there is. Now, on the body itself, right? So in the Pydantic model itself, you can also over there add data validation on each field, right? Now, because this isn't being done in like a function definition and annotated is like of the type typing, it's not done in the same way where you do annotated like the type and then whatever the function is. Instead of doing that, in the Pydantic model itself, the default values you define should have this field, the function, and then have that function define a default and all the other metadata that will be validated on the request object or on the outgoing response object, right? So that's how that's done, which is neat. I was just taking the step-by-step of declaring the model attributes, declaring them as fields as default. You'll see next create objects of subclass of common. There's some technical details about the classes and subclasses in Pydantic that I'm not going to get into, about how query and path are basically derived from this class called field info. Um, and field itself is a field info class. So, anyways, whatever. Um, Everything will be type validated and added to your JSON schema. Pretty straightforward. Moving on to nested models. Nested models, I mean, all of this has been very Pythonic, right? So if you just like intuitively, before you even go into reading this, if you want to create in a model within a model, so item inside a um, basket, let's put it that way, right? So basket, for example, we could have another Pydantic model called basket, and basket could have things like ID, subtotal, tax, multiple things like that, and then it could have list of items. So you could have, you know, uh, the item model nested inside this other basket model, right? And that's exactly what it is. List fields with type parameter. Uh, not sure what this is about. Tags list string. Okay. Okay, so it's not even gotten into the nested models. It's just saying like all the kinds of other iterable objects we could create within the model. So we can create tags, which is list of string, set of string, and once again, and as in the example I noted above, we have finally gotten into nested models where we have a image type image or none. So that's a singularly sublisted model. Submodel as a type. It's just taking it step by step, and you'll see this. Boom, done. And then you can add some special types and validation. So there's HTTP URL type, which will check the validity of a URL. Attributes with lists of symbols, submodels. Attributes with lists of submodels. So this is another level of layering. This is exactly what I had described earlier. Boom, boom. That's going to be our request object here from list image, right? So images list image. That's where we're getting this new nested capacity, and you can have it be even more nested than that, where it's like here in this particular example, offer has a attribute that is a list of items, and items has an attribute images that's a list of image, so your nesting can go as deep as you want. It's totally fine. um Bodies of pure lists. If the top level value of the JSON body expected is up, you can declare the type and the parameter of the function the same as Pydantic models. So you can say images as a list of images, which yeah, I'm not sure how copacetic that is, but basically it all works. Um, Bodies of arbitrary dicts. This is, I think, something you should never use. You should essentially almost always use a Pydantic model, but you can also declare a body as a dict with keys of some type and some value, and that's fine as well. Which is, I think, if you want to receive keys that you don't already know, that's literally what I was about to say. Like, this really only comes in handy where you're trying to do that, and that's just, it's kind of a, I mean, I'm sure there are some use cases where that's valuable, where you don't know the shape of the input, and therefore you structure your API so that it can accept arbitrary input. But yeah, I personally think try to avoid that whenever possible. Declare request example data. So this is something that's both not important at all in some ways, but also extremely important. So this entire page is all about the JSON schema that is generated, and one of the aspects of that JSON schema is being able to add examples. So in the Pydantic model itself, you can set up a model config. That's also how you do the extra parameters for bid option, for groups of, say, header parameters or cookie parameters. I think this is the last page. I think this is the page I'm gonna call it on for today, because spoiler alert, I am tired again. So, and then we can just define examples, and then it's really as simple as if you run the server and then you go to the URL and add /docs. In that interactive API documentation, there'll be some nice examples for you as well for expected request bodies or expected response bodies, right? So this is essentially how you do that for the Pydantic models. Another way is to set the examples on the field itself for each field individually within the Pydantic model. You can set up when you're doing the field data, you can set up examples equals this and do it like that. All right, and we're back, everyone. My folks needed my help, my technical skills. I am IT support for my family. Unsurprising. Okay, so regarding setting up the examples, as you pass the metadata using field, in the Pydantic model itself, you can define examples there as well. That's another way to do it. I'm not really sure how this would show up in the docs. I'm presuming it'd be similar or if not equivalent. And you can set it up in any one of these. Body with examples. So if first, I don't understand why do this versus this, because this seems like much cleaner. You know what? Let's test it out. Let's figure it out. So main, I'm just gonna copy this really quickly. Command A, nope, not that. Command A, B. Alrighty. UV run. How do we run? Fast API dev main. Something like that. Okay, so let's just check out the docs. Command click. Also, while we're here, I'm just gonna check out the UV docs, because I feel like there was something about you had to do a dash or something like that. No, it was just UV run fast API dev. Okay. So we are here. We open this up and we see the example value, and it's totally fine. There is no issues, right? So I am going to change that for this method where we define the examples in the body. Okay. Application startup complete. I'm just gonna refresh it. It looks exactly the same, honestly. So I don't see why you would do it this way over that way. Because I guess for completion's sake, because you can give it a field and all of these. I don't know. I don't know what the differentiator is, at least with bodies. I mean, I think the core consumption. Oh, I can also pass multiple examples here. Okay. Now, okay, so this was kind of confusing to me. I think essentially there is some historical weirdness regarding how the JSON schema standard developed and how the Open API schema developed, which standard developed, which used a modified version of the JSON schema standard. And at a certain point in time, the JSON schema standard did not have examples, and the Open API schema used a modified version of the JSON schema and did have an examples field. And then when the JSON schema standard changed and had their own, that changed the Open API schema, but the JSON schema, the new one, essentially could only display one example, whereas the old one could display multiple examples. And the way to use that interactive API documentation is essentially to use, where's it go? Open API underscore examples, which allows you to display multiple examples. So I think that's where this whole body thing is important. And it's also important to remember that they do mention that it's not just body, it's all of this. So this is much more handy for query parameters and things like that. Many things that you won't necessarily define a Pydantic model for. And also, like, this is useful to know in case you want to showcase multiple examples that relate to different scenarios and what the responses would be or whatever. Um, uh, is my recording? Yeah, okay, it's still going. So, anyways, there's some history here that I kind of understood, but essentially, this is how you declare examples. It's pretty straightforward. There's no rocket science here, and it is important to actually do these things and have API that is, even if it's API that's not meant to be public facing, interacting with the public, even if it's meant to be, utilized internally for, like, I don't know, some dev tool or something, having it be readable and understandable through some sort of interactive documentation system is important. And for that system to work, you need to provide the effort in terms of describing explicitly how it is used, through things like examples. So yeah, that's, I think, really important. um, I think that's it for me today. I need to, like, shut down and try and sleep. um, so I am going to end this conversation now. Have a great one, whoever's watching. Take care. Bye bye.